join. Oh, that's cool. There's a little announcement. It makes that is honestly a little creepy. It sounds like this like really malevolent robot, and it's next to a cartoon picture of a bear. It makes me think of Five Nights at Freddy's, if you've seen that.
I actually haven't.
Oh, I've never played it, but I've seen playthroughs of it, and it is terrifying. It's awful. Oh man, don't do it. Okay, well, I guess without further ado, hello there, and welcome to the Problem of Reading podcast. I'm Brevin.
And I'm Steven.
Where's Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be on here.
Yeah, ditching out on us. It's really unfortunate.
He's leaving us.
Yeah, what a tool.
Probably.
Alas, probably back in Oxford beagling or something. And I guess that's at that point he'll just okay. All right, how does Brevin do it? How does he do with these intros? I don't want to deal with this. This is why we need him.
We do.
Oh, okay, so apparently for those of you just tuning in, as you can tell, our Pope-loving Catholic friend Brevin is no longer with us. He has gone on to better things, including going to bed early. So you're stuck with me and Sam right now, or me and Steven, depending on who you want. So let's get started with the usual rigmarole. Steven, what are you drinking?
I am drinking a nice pour of Evan Williams Tennessee whiskey.
Ooh, right on.
I think it's Tennessee whiskey. Tennessee or Kentucky,
that sounds
one
about
of
right.
those states. Yeah, it's whiskey. It's good.
Is it Tennessee bourbon. Or is it Kentucky that is technically the only place that you can truly have bourbon?
You know, I'm actually checking the bottle because it's Kentucky. Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey.
Gotcha. So it's Kentucky that can be bourbon. You can make all the whiskey you want. You can use the exact same recipe in Tennessee, but then it's not bourbon.
No, I don't think so.
Such a strange culture.
Actually, I don't know, because Jack Daniels, isn't that bourbon?
I think that's bourbon.
I don't know. Yeah. That's made in Tennessee.
Oh, well, maybe it's not bourbon. Man, they're imposters.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I don't actually know. And the thing is, I don't think either of us know anything about liquor. I just know this is good, and it's extremely affordable.
Yep, and that's all you really want out of that.
It's some of the best rated budget whiskey anywhere, because it's incredibly complicated. It's tasty, and your medium bottle is $17 including tax,
which is a lovely thing. That is one of the nice things about bourbon is, in general, you can get a reasonable bottle of bourbon for not insane amounts of money, whereas like with scotch, you're paying for anything under than like $50, it's going to be absolute garbage. Which I feel so very pretentious. Oh yeah, oh absolutely. It's the wild world of whiskey, or not whiskey, liquor.
Yeah. And of course, with our lack of knowledge on this, we've now lost, one of our two listeners who's a liquor connoisseur.
Yep. They stormed out.
Introduction segment. They're gone.
Well, it was nice having them. I, on the other hand, am not quite as classy as you are, and I am drinking the rest of the pop that my family left. So they visited and they got a 2-liter, and so I'm downing the last of the Coca-Cola. So my insides will be rotted very soon.
It's fine, but if we put our two drinks together,
ooh, now we're talking.
Good thing.
That's quite true. Though the mixed drink of like rum and Coke or whiskey and Coke or what have you, I don't know. It always struck me as kind of a strange. It tastes not quite sweet enough, but not quite savory enough. It always struck me as kind of this weird oscillating middle.
That is fair. I mean, I've heard of people who they get so accustomed to those that then they can't drink Coca-Cola without adding whiskey to it.
Ooh,
which is really bad.
Yeah, that strikes me as a dangerous place to be. You could always carry around your emergency flask, but then you really are entering dangerous territories.
Yeah, adding bourbon to everything.
Yeah, that's just don't do that. Don't.
Which I understand that, but don't seek to do that.
Yep, you and me both.
Yeah.
Well, all right then. Now that we've We shall move on to the articles, keeping it nice and snappy today. So I will be presenting the first of either one or two articles, and it is called "Secular Monks" by Andrew Taggart, and it was recently published in First Things, and it caught my eye. Being a devout Catholic man who is pathologically obsessed with the Pope and with Inquisitions, of course, I would never pass this up. Slash, I'm.
This is water.
This, ooh, well done. Alrighty then. So the author of this article, Andrew Taggart, is a self-described practical philosopher. Not the leader of the band The Chainsmokers, which I found out actually shares the same name. But he regularly works with what could probably be described as the elite, the movers and shakers, as it were. So like CEOs, finance gurus, technologists, venture capitalists, pretty much like everything you think of when you think of like old dudes in cigar or like smoking cigars and in suits, or like young guys in like really flashy suits, and pretty much everything in that sphere. So in this article, he comments on a trend towards a neo-asceticism that is becoming dominant in this space, which he dubs as kind of a secular monasticism. And the trend of this sphere is a particularly strict lifestyle, complete with rigorous biohacking, data-driven health optimization, meditation, and punctuated with ascetical practices such as intermittent fasting and ice baths. So Taggart argues that this is a direct inheritor of the Calvinist view of monasticism, that each believer is a monk all their lives, but strips away the transcendent aspects that Calvinism had already begun removing. Calvinism had, in essence, taken the monastic practice and applied it to everyday life, in essence saying that you are going to be practicing the monastic community in everyday life. You don't need to go to a monastery to fulfill that calling. So here we actually return to our beloved Weberia with all of its trains, as Max Weber is the progenitor of this idea in Calvinism. He wasn't associated with Calvinism, but he commented on this. Quote, as Weber saw it, what distinguished Calvinism was its critique of otherworldly Catholic monasticism, which made room for each devout Calvinist to be a monk all his life. Henceforth, all would be devoted to pursuing ascetic ideals within mundane occupations, end quote. So for the secular monk, work, both personal and external betterment that is the key to salvation. Just as important to becoming wealthy is becoming powerful is becoming healthy. Take this rather long quote from the article. Quote, the result is a life design or life hacking of the kind urged by the life designer Tim Ferriss. Ferriss's philosophy, at once secular, ascetic, and Pelagian, begins with metaphysical primacy of human agency. In Tribe of Mentors, Short Life Advice from the Best in the World, Ferriss asserts that, quote, you are the author of your own life, end quote. As human agents, we should be able to divide our actions into means and ends, and if we're good optimizers, we will discover and use the most effective means by which we can satisfy those ends. This defines human existence as Ferriss sees it, an endless game of self-one-upmanship. Ferriss sees his job as the crafting of tools for success. Any technique detached from any tradition is fair game for mashup and remixing for the purpose of self-fashioning. End quote. So for Ferriss, first you define what you want success to be, and then you achieve it by, quote, collecting the right field-tested beliefs and habits, end quote. This is all, I should emphasize, not in the service of self-betterment, of efficiency and optimization of the self, which I should say isn't necessarily a bad thing in itself. There's nothing wrong with becoming more focused or a more contemplative individual. But what's odd is that these are ancient practices of meditation, asceticism, etc. And these are all for the first time being used not to attain enlightenment, but to attain rather more, shall we say, mundane goals. Meditation is no longer a meeting with the transcendent, but rather a way to train yourself to think clearly during the board meeting or when making a high stakes financial decision. Contemplating one's death results in biohacking and, quote, leaving a ding in the universe, end quote, a la Steve Jobs, instead of reflecting on the passing nature of all things. Monasticism is all consuming. There is no room, for example, for marriage or family, both in the religious monasticism, but also in the secular monasticism, it turns out. The good life, read godly life, is the free life, one free from obligation. One cannot leave a ding in the universe when one is caring for one's spouse or watching over a sick child. Taggart Riley concludes, quote, it is good for a man to be alone, end quote. So some somewhat disparate observations that Taggart makes, but honestly, it's a really fascinating approach to this growing trend of kind of quasi spiritualism, but with more of a focus on industry or professionalism or what have you. I've been seeing quite a lot of this stuff popping up. For example, Ryan Holiday is a big business advocate of stoicism, kind of a mishmash of business philosophy with the ancient practice of stoicism, but it all seems to be this goal of self betterment, not for the sake of becoming better in yourself or a better human or, a la virtue ethics, but rather becoming more professional, becoming more competent, becoming more et cetera, et cetera. Which may be somewhat of a straw man on Ryan Holiday. I have a friend who actually really likes him, but it's still, that seems to be kind of the growing trend. So Taggart's diagnosis in my mind is actually quite spot on.
Yeah, I agree. I love this article. It kind of describes the corporate world pretty well. And like Steven, you and I both work in large companies. Yours is a bit larger than mine,
Mhm.
um, but you kind of hear this where you see all these trends constantly coming out, to how to better yourself and to become a better and happier worker. And I think that's one thing that he kind of neglects. But you try how to become a happier worker for the success of the company.
Mhm.
Um, if there's anything I wish that he would have talked about more, it would be more of the appeal of this lifestyle. Yeah. Do you know if he's Catholic or what his personal beliefs are?
Oh, I looked him up briefly, but I didn't look up religious affiliation. My impression is, even just from his casual dropping of the word Pelagianism, I'm guessing Christian, either very well educated Protestant or
Mhm.
moderately well educated Catholic Orthodox.
So first things crowd.
Yeah, first
Yeah.
first things contributor.
Okay. Yeah. I guess like one thought I had, and this maybe is reflected in my own life, is that you know he's saying all these things that people are trying to find meaning in this, and that they're using these ancient practices to build up meaning, but they're looking in the wrong place because of the mundane. And when I express those ideals of trying to find meaning to people in either the corporate world or in my personal circles, the reaction I often get is you're way overcomplicating it. And so that might be an answer to Taggart, is to say, well, this is kind of reading a lot into these practices, a lot more than they should be read into. Maybe they are just techniques to succeed in the boardroom or succeed in the meeting or just be a happier person. And so that would derive itself from just kind of a different problem that we're experiencing in Western culture, which is the idolatry of happiness. But that's a whole other conversation.
Mhm. Well, I
Um,
mean, it's kind of the idolatry of happiness meets,
mhm,
I feel somewhat slimy saying this, but almost a Marxist critique on capitalism. That
mm,
you become not an end in yourself, but you become a means for the company. You become a means for
mhm.
whatever part of this, whatever business you're a part of. So you are becoming better, so you can better serve the company.
Which is fair. And if you're a person who realizes that, there's two options that you can take. Is you could either change, burn the system down, and find meaning somewhere else, or you could turn inward. You could find meaning in yourself, which is exactly what these secular monks are doing.
Mhm.
So maybe like, to use a Marxist critique, maybe this is a reaction to the commodification of labor and the commodification of persons. Continuing to use the Marxist framework, what they're doing here is in reaction to their status as the proletariat and
Mhm.
their hopeless condition as workers. Instead of revolting, as Marx predicted they're doing, they're turning inwards. They're revolting against that drive inside of themselves to find some transcendent meaning and finding that meaning within the mundane.
Mhm. Although I'm
And
not
almost
sure I would agree that that's necessarily relevant with this particular group. It seems that they would be more bourgeois rather than proletariat, right? I mean, you're talking,
mm,
Steve Jobs, for example. I mean, he was definitely on top of the ladder.
that's a good point. Yeah, that is a good point.
Although, I mean, to be fair,
Um,
like I have coworkers who are also very interested in this, and I mean, to an extent, I want to say good on them. They're looking into these really valuable practices, and maybe it's a good start. But personally, I disagree with the idea that the end of this is just to be a better worker, or the end of this
mhm,
is just to be happier. These
yeah,
traditions from across the board, you go with Buddhist meditation or Christian contemplative prayer, all of this is to meet some transcendence. And it seems
Yeah.
that, like you said, it's no longer to meet the transcendent, it is to meet the self, or it is self-centered, or not self-centered, but well, I mean, somewhat.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, when I was reading this, the big thought I had was at the one point when he said they're using these practices that are traditionally aimed towards the transcendent and using them for just finding success in the everyday mundane. And when I read that, the first thought I had was that, well, maybe it's not a transcendence or mundane, maybe it's transcendence in the mundane, which
Interesting. I
is
mean, finding life, especially a lot of these people who are so successful that they've kind of acquired everything, and it's still not quite it's not quite doing it, and so they have to turn to these
exactly.
practices.
Yes, exactly. Um, because they realize that even at their success, I mean, Steve Jobs and Jack Dorsey are their two big examples. And I mean, these are people who are on the cutting edge of technology and should be having the most interesting lives possible. And I mean, it doesn't take you don't need to be a Christian necessarily to recognize that it's very difficult to find meaning or impossible to find
Mhm.
meaning from success as being a CEO of one of the world's largest companies. Um, and so what they're turning to is more of, kind of like I said earlier, like a transcendence or a purpose in the everyday things, and those things that are outside of their success as a CEO. Those things like, I mean, Dorsey's case, taking ice baths and meditation and all these health practices and biohacking and all of these different things to make an impact on yourself. That seems these mundane impacts on yourself seem to find more meaning for them than the success in the world.
Which it's interesting. So the whole biohacking thing somewhat fascinates me because it is a lot of times kind of linked in with this kind of personal self optimization, and to the credit of a lot of the personal self optimization, they do seem to take a more holistic approach. Spiritual,
Mhm,
mental, physical, but it's still such a fascinating idea, though, especially when it's linked with stoicism, because stoicism,
mhm.
the whole point of it is to, well, maybe not the whole point, but one of the big points in it is remembering that you are going to die and there's nothing you can do about it. And biohacking seems to fly directly in the face of that. Biohacking seems to be kind of protesting, saying like, well, maybe I'll die, but I'm going to hold out for as long as possible. Now,
Hmm,
that's certainly not to say that exercise is not good, or that like healthy eating habits and healthy living habits in general is not a good thing. I mean, I try to stay healthy and whatnot, and I think that is a certainly a valuable practice. But it seems that biohacking almost takes it to the next level. I mean, think of even the phrase biohacking. It's pretty much saying I'm going to be able to subvert the system, which
yeah.
in my opinion, somewhat flies in the face of this whole contemplating one's own death. The whole point of contemplating one's death is that you realize that no matter what happens, no matter how powerful you become, no matter how healthy you become, you're going to die, and that's just that. Even Steve Jobs kind of comments, "I'm going to put a ding on the universe." Like, universe, universe doesn't care. It's gonna once the heat death of the universe comes, nobody's going to remember Apple. And
Mhm.
so I on the one hand, I keep going back and forth because I don't want to write this stuff out of hand, because there is surely something good about the practices that they're doing, but it does seem to be kind of just in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Biohacking is just a fascinating phenomenon. Um, and I do see what you're saying is that it seems to fly in the face of like recognizing your own humanity. Um, One contrary point, though, is that compared to the majority of American society, of a consumer society, it seems to be far more aware of your situation eh, as a finite, limited biological being in the universe. So I don't know. Like I mean, yes, it's kind of it seems to be trying to subvert the system, but it's subverting the system. It's not claiming that you won't die necessarily. It's just saying, hey, here's the reality of the situation. How are you going to live because of that reality situation? Let's take stock of your body and work with it.
No, actually,
and
I
maybe
really like that.
yeah.
I think that's a rather valid critique on what I just said. That
Oh,
that makes a lot of sense. Because at least so what you correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is kind of with a lot of more consumeristic philosophies, it's almost just distract myself that from the fact that I'm going to die. I'm going to do whatever it
exactly.
takes. I'm going to go engage in whatever consumer practices it's going to take to make me not realize I'm going to die. Whereas at least the biohacking, sure, they're trying to subvert the system, but they're at least acknowledging the system exists.
Mhm.
Okay. Well said, well said.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's an acknowledgement of the system, but then it's taking you acknowledge your nature as a human, um, instead of I mean, well, I think the Taggart would critique this, but for this limited point, you acknowledge yourself as a human, as a being, and then you work within those parameters versus a lot of modern society, you try to ignore those parameters. Um,
Mm.
Now, other statements like Steve Jobs, the ding in the universe, which is, I mean, I think that quote's just so interesting. But to make a ding in the universe does put him in a position of being more divine than
Mm.
human. Um, so
Which I think
there is that
Taggart
problem.
mentioned that that seems to be one of their goals. Actually, I just found it. Quote: "These men want to create something larger than themselves, to leave something behind. They want to be like gods." End quote.
So they're saying we're not gods right now. So instead of the majority of society, which says, "Don't worry, don't worry about God or transcendence or anything. Just be happy." They're saying, "No, no, no. We should worry about transcendence. We want to be gods," which is so close.
It
But
really is, and I mean, I think I would still take that over a just kind of ignoring the whole situation.
hmm
At least there's almost
yeah, I mean,
a fierceness that comes with the no, I want to do these practices. I want to, master my own fate and such. There's still something almost you can work with that.
yeah, I mean, I'll take a kind of or beneficent utilitarianism over hedonism any day.
Great. So the things he did go somewhat on a tangent but I think it actually is quite relevant. Taggart notes that a lot of these guys they are wildly successful. They have all the resources they could ask for. They are set in life. One thing he notes is that most of them are not, or not most of them are not married, but a large part of them are not married. And most of them do not have children. That the average marrying or the average children per household, I believe, I can't find the number, but is shockingly low, especially when you get to that sphere. And there is, I mean, I think it's almost a cheeky
Hmm.
comparison that he makes with monasticism, given that monastics like explicitly eschew any sort of marital, both marriage, but also just sexual relations. More likely than not, like it's more of casual sex sort of situation in those spheres. That said, it is a very interesting comparison. And there is this rather, I think I called it out in my summary. There is this rather sad conclusion he comes with that the aesthetic conception that they have of this life, this kind of hacking their own fate, requires many things to be given up, such as wife, husband, children. Uh,
Hmm.
Whoever takes this road is pretty much eschewing any sort of spouse or children in exchange for this. Well, this kind of maybe being able to win over fate, because one can't commit to mastering one's own life when one has to care for one's spouse or children. And I thought that a very interesting and unique take that I had not considered before. Most of the time, what I've heard is that it's more of the generic, much what you were calling out, Sam, the more hedonistic, just couples just don't want to have children because it's going to cost money and time and whatnot. But this is more deliberate. This is more no, having a wife or a husband or children, this is going to disrupt my mastery of my own fate, which I thought was a rather brilliant insight.
Yeah, and I don't think we would ever call like Paul selfish for saying, um, for encouraging individuals to not get married. Um,
Oh, certainly not.
yeah. So I guess this is kind of a question that's been in the back of my head this whole. I mean, we've touched on it, but is this transcendence inherently selfish in the same way that American hedonistic society is selfish. I also love how we've just completely conceded and agreed that American society is hedonist in this conversation.
We're not even trying to
we're
debate
just
that
we're just
point. We just
using
acknowledge
hedonism
it. To
to
any of our non-American listeners right now, you can just take that as a gift that we're going to give you. You can now say even the Americans think that they're hedonists.
Oh, the question I was asking was, is this secular monk inherently selfish? Is
I
it
think
selfish to seek for this transcendence?
I think it is, well, selfishness unfortunately brings about a whole host of connotations. So I mean, to an extent, there you cannot do a purely selfless act because you are the one doing it, right? Like I can't. Hopefully, what I choose because I think it is better than the alternative, even if it's something to the effect of like I am giving my life up. One could say that was a very selfless act, but at the same time, more accurately, it was an act that I still chose. A selfless act
Yeah,
would
and
be
you're
more of something was done to me and I just didn't have any choice in it. Um,
mm,
so I guess I just want to add that grain of salt before we entered that. I think it's difficult to distinguish between pure selfishness and pure selflessness. Um, so
mm.
they are selfish. I think I would argue they are selfish, but in a much different way than the casual hedonist would be selfish. Because I think Taggart comments that a lot of their, for example, meditation is more towards like giving themselves an edge, kind of mastery over oneself. Which the weird thing is, you could probably still make the same argument that the Buddhist or Hindu or Christian monk do this very similar practices. They do very similar things, but I think they would argue, but we are trying to empty ourselves. We are trying to escape ourselves and become one with the divine. We are trying to meet the transcendent.
Yeah, we're in the Christian monk sense, we're praying for the rest of Christ's body. Mhm.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the whole kind of paradoxical. You lose yourself only to find yourself, and more than you could have ever had without. Something. C.S. Lewis, who says it far more brilliantly than I could articulate.
Yeah.
Lewis, patron
Yeah.
saint of evangelicals.
He is. I once knew somebody who said that C.S. Lewis is an evangelical. C.S. Lewis should be added to the canon.
I mean, to an extent, I'm actually a little surprised that the Anglicans haven't added him to the canon. He was devoutly Anglican, and I wonder if you could argue that he's a doctor of
Well,
he would be a doctor of the Anglican Church. He's definitely he wouldn't be canonized by the Catholic or
mm,
Orthodox, but Anglicans
I
still
don't
have
think so.
saints. Really?
I don't think so. And so here's why. Well, there's two reasons why. But we're gonna go to the tangent of C.S. Lewis.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Two
I'm
things.
always fine with going on a tangent with C.S.
For
Lewis.
Yeah, first is that he was not a Christian for a very long time, and he was mostly persuaded to Christianity by apologetic arguments, which is not a problem.
Mm.
But his contributions theologically were mostly reiterating um, previously agreed upon points. Like I don't think Lewis necessarily innovated on much or drew drew more meaning out of the scripture or out of tradition or anything. He was more reiterating points and feeding them back to a modern audience. I mean, his The Abolition of Man,
Mm.
amazing series of lectures.
I
Absolutely
need to
love it.
reread that.
But it's just him. It's really good. And he's just feeding Aquinas through modern British culture and speaking about it through a British primary school text, which is brilliant. But but ultimately, he's not really innovating on anything. The
Mm.
second thing is that in the UK, they hate C.S. Lewis.
Really now? I mean, I'm guessing he's probably quoted by every single American that comes over there. But really,
Well,
they don't like him.
more exactly in Oxford, they hate C.S. Lewis. The program I was with, they had a course that you could take that was C.S. Lewis in context,
Yeah,
which I mean, sounds fun because like you're
yeah,
in
yeah.
Oxford, you can study C.S. Lewis in Oxford. Why not? I
I
was
know.
not taking that course, but I had a bunch of friends who were. One of my roommate was. He loved it. It's great. And then I was talking to some of the Brits, and they were like, "Oh, all these Americans, all they want to come out here and do is study C.S. Lewis, study a real scholar." Because in Oxford, he's not viewed as a real scholar because he got his position basically for writing a load of children's books.
I've heard that he actually pretty much to an extent ruined his career chances at serious scholarship because he wanted to write children's literature. Um,
Exactly.
which I mean, I to
Yeah,
be fair, I
and
can't imagine that just like you become the children's lit guy, even if you have brilliant things to say, no one's going to take you that seriously because they just associate your name with children's lit.
exactly. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how it happened. And he didn't, but then he didn't really have any serious contribution outside of that, like
Yeah.
in a scholarly sense. And so I guess I should clarify my previous statement. He's not hated. He may not be hated in the UK universally. He's definitely hated in Oxford. Um,
Nice, and maybe
um,
in the UK he's not overly either. People aren't overly fond.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and also the UK is just generally more secular, and so
Yeah.
the Chronicles of Narnia and those kind of stories that I mean, even many relatives I have who are now atheists still cherish those stories. Or friends I have who love the Chronicles of Narnia are atheists or agnostic, and
Hmm.
so it's something that American culture is a little bit more receptive to, which is really ironic given that lots of people read them and think that these are these very British books. Really, they're more well received in America. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, especially and maybe we'll cut a lot of this, but he's especially hated when people compare him to Tolkien because
Oh,
scholars in Oxford are like, they were friends, sure. Tolkien was a real scholar. Lord of the Rings was a side project of his. He was a legitimate linguist who made the authoritative translation of Beowulf.
right. Whereas,
He knew things. C.S. Lewis was just riding on his coattails and
gotcha.
writing children's books, trying to compete and never could.
Which I mean, to be fair, if you compare Chronicles of Narnia to Lord of the Rings, I enjoyed Chronicles of Narnia, but yeah, they don't have to hold a candle to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
It just they just don't. Although,
especially in the world building.
oh, for sure, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I would still contend that his theological work, even though it may not have contained any novelty, the impact that it had of being able to distill a lot of these really complicated ideas to a more general audience, I think there
Mhm.
is something certainly praiseworthy about that. So to the second point, yes, he was not a serious scholar, especially in his field of English
Mhm.
literature. I think I would argue that his theological work was slightly better than that. Though maybe
Mhm.
as far as serious scholarship is concerned, probably not. The scholarship he was bringing was probably more indicative of the fact that he was a professor at Oxford and therefore very, very intelligent, but not not quite as solid as the most brilliant theologian. He was not a
Mhm.
Bonhoeffer or a I don't know who was the other big theologian at the
Barb,
time.
Barth,
Bart, thank you.
Barth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, fair point. Though I think to your
Yeah.
first point, though, I would argue that sainthood does not necessitate novelty. Although
Mm.
I think you answered my question when I asked like, would he be considered a doctor of the church, and that answer would probably be no.
Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
think sainthood would not does not require novelty. So, but I mean, still, you've got a point at the Anglican Church, which is in UK. If UK doesn't really like him, then yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and also the third point would be that a lot of his positions are quite theologically conservative,
Yeah.
and some of the bits of his books, especially the third Narnia book, have anti Muslim connotations to them,
Yeah, there were
and
a few
in the
points where it's
UK,
just
that's not going to fly.
yeah, that isn't gonna fly. There are a few points where I do recall reading some stuff and not really thinking much of it, but now I look back and it's like,
Oof.
you know, probably could have done without that.
Yeah, the desert people with turbans and dark skin who worship the evil rotting meat god. Yeah,
Yeah, Tash, I think
yeah,
it was.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Although
yeah.
the scene where the Tashbin warrior ends up in Aslan's country in book 7, that was quite lovely. But yes, probably could have done without the clearly poking fun
Mhm.
at Muslims.
Yeah, love that seems lovely, but also the most controversial thing I read for years because it seemed to say that you could go to heaven if you didn't like
Mhm.
ask for repentance for your sins.
See, that is my shield whenever I start talking to people who are a bit more theologically conservative than me, or a lot more
Mm,
theologically conservative than me. Whenever I mention, inclusivism or what have you, and they start getting all over me, I just drop C.S. Lewis, and immediately the
yeah,
arguments, they fall silent in reverence, and I walk away
yeah,
victorious.
yeah, yeah. Oh, actually, the last reason, and then we can get back, or you
And
can
you
tell me.
really don't want C.S. Lewis to be a saint, do you?
I don't know. I don't think he should be a saint. But
Gosh
the
darn it!
last reason is that he actually was strongly he was pretty indecisive about his faith. Like he went to the Anglican Church because it was what was available, but he was actually this is according to my Orthodox friend, but he was actually quite not Orthodox friend, interested in
Catholic
Orthodox
friend
friend. But
or interest in Orthodox? Okay,
yeah, you know him.
cryptodox.
But yeah, yes. Um the fourth point would be though that he was actually very interested in orthodoxy. And
Really?
yes, he studied the kind he's been learning theology and learning about Christianity, and he finally decided he was on board with this thing. And Tolkien was obviously fighting so hard to get him to convert to Catholicism.
Oh yeah.
And he actually was far more interested in Eastern Orthodoxy, but there were no Eastern Orthodox churches like around him,
Interesting.
apparently.
That's funny because
Um,
so about a year ago, I actually was having a debate with an Orthodox individual, and she like I think of course being me, I brought up C.S. Lewis, and she had said like, well, he would have been Orthodox if he had been,
mhm.
if he had known about it, and I countered like he was a brilliant or you know Oxford scholar. He knew about Orthodoxy. He was devout Anglican. I'm next time I see her, I may
Huh.
have to eat my words and say, like, actually, you may have
No,
been more right than me.
he was interested. I mean, I know that there
He never
is
converted for
historically.
sure, but I mean,
Yeah, he was interested in it. I mean, and it may not it wouldn't have been actually the reason that it was not around because I know for a fact there's a very historical Orthodox parish in Oxford.
mhm.
Um, I just I happen to know that. And
Actually, on
actually,
that note,
yeah,
sorry, we're going on all sorts of tangents right
yes,
now, but on that note, have you heard of Metropolitan Callistus Ware?
Metropolitan Callistus Ware is the bishop of the diocese that covers Oxford, and he
Yeah,
is based in Oxford
yeah,
currently.
yeah. So I've listened to a couple of his lectures. Apparently, he spoke at SPU a couple of times, or once or twice, and I
Yes,
really
he
enjoyed
is.
those lectures. And yeah, oh
Well,
wait,
I know
were
he
you
has
there?
because I currently have his. I well, no, I didn't see him, but I have his book in actually now sitting on the table in front of me because we every core theology class is required to read it.
No kidding.
Yep,
Huh.
it's very strange at this progressive evangelical school. The one universal part about the third theological theology class is you read Clasus Ware.
No kidding. Is that
Yep,
the Orthodox way, or is it a different one?
yep,
Huh,
the
no
Orthodox way.
kidding.
It's a
I
good
had no
book.
idea.
It's very
Yeah,
good.
I started reading through. I haven't finished it, but yeah,
Yeah,
he's a
it's
good
great.
writer. Great speaker. Very
Mhm.
calm voice.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's
he's
awesome.
British, so
Yeah.
you know.
Anyway, wow, that
Anyway,
was a tangent.
that really was. We went on a few tangents there.
Yeah.
So
So
C.S. Lewis
Lewis
clearly is
might
not
suck.
going to be a saint of the Anglican Church or any
Yep.
church for that matter. Though I do love how the fact that pretty much every denomination tries to claim him, but apparently Orthodox might actually have a reasonable claim on him. Hmm,
Yeah, and that is the nice thing about Lewis is that if nothing else, he does serve as a great unifier,
it really does.
which
Yeah,
we need more of in the church.
quite true. Quite true.
Rant?
Oh, rants. Yes, indeed, rants. Sam, what are you angry about?
Oh, what am I angry about? I actually haven't had a planned rant, so this is going to be a channeling of emotion,
Okay.
and
Is it just
yeah.
going to be you screaming for like 30 seconds straight?
No, let's see here. Let's see here. So the Democratic race has collapsed, and it's okay. This could get a little bit political. Let's just see how this works. All right, so we're
We've
seeing
never shied
so
from being political before. At least I don't think
especially
we have.
me. I
Yeah.
never have. Okay,
I'm
so
surprised at the
the
caveat.
Democratic is coming to not a close, but is definitely being narrowed down between and the progressive, inclusive young party of our nation has distilled itself down to choosing between two candidates, two old white men, both of whom are over the age of 77. So I don't really have much of a, and I do plan on voting in the Democratic primary because why not? But I guess my rant here is not so much the fact that they've distilled themselves down to those two candidates, but the reaction to it. The reaction that I've seen from several acquaintances I have who are further left than Bernie Sanders, who are looking at this and saying that this is a tragedy for the Democratic Party and that they have um, completely lost their way by not including people of color, by not including women, etc. And that is a problem. We can talk about that problem later. But I guess that my rant would be that they somewhat brought this on themselves. And by the way that this race has been run, with allowing far too many candidates into the race, by opening it up with basically any hatred of Donald Trump qualifying as a viable presidential candidate, they limited themselves down to not being able to pick an inclusive candidate. And I guess what I'm saying is, sorry, this is going to be a disjointed rant, so edit it together to make it make sense. But this what we're experiencing right now is the fruit of years of sheer hatred of Trump, and that being the only uniting factor. At the end of the day, if they want to look for inclusivity, you need to be able to open it up to talking about actual policy and actually having a debate versus trying to find your own niche in an intersectionality matrix. There's my rant. Does that make any sense?
I definitely, I think that really does. We typically don't talk after rants, but I mean, I'm okay with that. Like that.
Oh, I was just asking you. Just
Yeah, no, that's not.
we can
That
we can
sounds like
we can cut this, but
that sounds reasonable to me. I mean, it is kind of. It's honestly kind of remarkable because one would think, especially with how mobilized a lot of the younger vote is and how more inclined towards Democrats a lot of the younger vote is, that and also how motivated or anti-Trump voters are, both within the conservative but also definitely in the liberal camps. One would think that they kind of had a clear path, but unfortunately, what you said, pretty much their only platform was anti-Trump, or at least that was considered a viable
Mhm.
platform in and of itself. And it's just kind of a tragic thing to see them just kind of throw away what was ostensibly a decent opportunity to kind of win an election, and just kind of throw away a lot
Mhm.
of really kind of cool opportunities they had.
Yeah, and I guess for a second wind of my rant, just that point that I kind of realized,
Mhm.
for a second, a rant B, um, is I guess the example of Elizabeth Warren and the reaction I've seen to Elizabeth Warren. I mean, she dropped out of the race today. This is Thursday that we're speaking. She just dropped out this morning, and the reaction I've seen to this is the most moral candidate has just dropped out of this race. Now, Elizabeth Warren is a fine candidate. She I think is a mediocre progressive, and fair somewhere between Biden and Sanders in her policy. She kind of
Mhm.
has that policy wonk, sort of law professor vibe, which is exactly who she is. And she's a fine candidate. But to say that she's the only moral option exclusively because she is a woman, I think is the problem with the Democratic today, is that you're not is by reducing everybody to their intersection of attributes and not looking at actually what we're electing, which is the president of the United States. You're neglecting a lot of competent candidates, such as Elizabeth Warren, such as Kamala Harris, such as any of these other candidates who check far more boxes than the two that we have right now, but also may make better candidates simply because by reducing it down to that, you can't win the national electorate. There we go.
Well said. Well said. Uh, my rant isn't quite as political, although it is becoming a political firestorm right now. Coronavirus, COVID-19.
Jeez.
I know, right? So, for those of you who may not be aware, I live in Seattle. I'm also, by the way, I'm not actually Brevin. If you haven't caught that yet. So this is Steven. I live in Seattle, and for the past, Sam, what would you say, like what, 2 weeks or so, the panic has been kind of
Week and a
increasing.
half.
Week and a half,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, week and 2 weeks. I mean, yeah.
So people have been like growing more and more concerned over this. And to be fair, like, viruses, this is nothing to sneeze at, as it were. And this is a rather serious thing. But at the same time, the amount of sheer panic that has been building up to the point where like shelves are being completely stripped of face masks, for example, or like water bottles and various like quasi survival goods such as hand sanitizer. Like these things are being completely ripped from the shelves. It's becoming just to the point of almost absurdity how much people are panicking over what is amounting to be a definitely not a benign disease, but not that malevolent of one. At least I say now in the early stages of the Seattle, infestation, as it were.
You just
So
watch it in 2 months, Seattle won't exist.
it will
We'll
be
all be
wiped off the
safe.
face of the earth. I will be dead, and this will be played at my funeral, and people will just think, "Geez, what a douchebag." And I'll deserve it. I'll deserve it. I apologize. I think honestly, my rant takes a more philosophical when I think of Walker Percy's comments in Lost in the Cosmos, where he starts commenting on how people get oddly excited when they read about kind of wars and rumors of wars, as it were. How when they read about disasters and how bad things are happening and imminent doom is upon us and whatnot, and this weird excitement that they get. But if I'm being honest, so do I. And how there is this weird thrill I get on like, oh man, maybe this is really going to be bad, and oh man, I got to prepare. It's just such a strange and bizarre feeling. This weird love affair we humans have with our own doom, and so all that to say, my rant is: people stop panicking so much over coronavirus. Be safe. Practice, sanitization. Don't go near people with coronavirus if they're known to have it. But at the same time, this isn't the end of the
Wash
world.
your hands.
Hopefully, wash your hands. Yes, wash your hands. It's about that simple. Hopefully, we'll see. Again,
Yeah,
if I'm dead from coronavirus in 2 months, well, you know how right I was. It would be ironic enough that I would accept that as my fate.
it'd be really funny. It
Yeah,
would be funny.
it would be. It honestly would be. I would be okay with that. I would be okay with some
Yeah.
good natured chuckles at my funeral.
Mhm.
Yeah. Dang it! Now I'm actually
Yeah,
kind
I
of
mean,
frightened
maybe
that
it's
like
just
I have tempted the fates. Like I've poked the stick at the gods, and now they're just gonna smite the crap out of me.
yes, smite you with the coronavirus. But,
Mhm.
I mean, maybe this is just us trying to find some kind of transcendence in the mundane. Like transcendence in the mundane, preparing to avoid illness during a season when people get ill.
There we go. We must look to ourselves. We must meditate. We must take ice baths, and that will help us help shield us from the oncoming storm of the coronavirus, the apocalypse
And
of the modern age.
put on thy face mask and sanitize thy hands.
Then he will be able to resist the flaming arrows of.
For I am coronavirus, you're
Okay, well, for
gone.
everyone here at the Problem with Reading podcast, Brevin wasn't here. I'm Steven.
And I'm Sam.
And we will see you next time. I honestly forget where we were going with that. Somehow ended up on C.S. Lewis. I think we were talking about children at one point. C.S. Lewis, Oxford, close to square.
We'll have Brevin edit it together and make it. Um, can you imagine him just listening to this recording and just be like, "What the hell, you guys?"
I am never missing another episode.
This is encouragement, Brevin. Don't ever leave us alone with the recording equipment again.
I mean, you left two evangelicals, or at least quasi-evangelicals, alone, and of course, we're going to spend most of our time just talking about C.S. Lewis and the pros and cons.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, anyway, transcendence in the mundane. Probably. Yeah. Let's not do that. Let's find transcendence in in Lewis.
Transcendent. And in Lewis. That's
Lewis.
that's where we will find transcendence. C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.